6. At the time he had, I think, been recognized as the father of the hydrogen bomb and so on. While I was working with a different company, I had left the Portland Cement Association, but I still had contact with Stephen Brunauer. And so when I heard Teller was going to be out at my alma mater, I asked Stephen if he'd be interested in going to the meeting, because I had intended to, and invited him to go along with me. So both he and Lou Copeland went with me to the Wheaton meeting and had a chance to meet Teller again, the two of them. They were on opposite ends politically. And so the meeting, as I recall, was rather somewhat strained, because I don't think they ever did completely reconcile their political differences. But it was interesting to see the two of them together. And then since then, Teller has been, he was down at UOP about 3 years ago for a lecture on his brilliant pebbles. I didn't hear about it in time to go down, but they gave me a copy of the tape that they made of the meeting. And so that's the extent of my contact, other than the conversations I had with Brunauer about Teller. But as I say, I had more contact with him than I had with Emmett, because the only time we met Emmett was over in London at that one time. And of course, Steve was always very fluid with his praise and respect for Paul and the work that he had done with him. But they were three very interesting men. And certainly that BET theory has achieved as much prominence as any single theory in the history of chemistry, I think. But I felt very privileged working for him at the time that I did.
Now, when did you go to Portland Cement?
I went to Portland right after I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 1947.
So you were there before Brunauer?
I was there before Brunauer came. I graduated in 1947 in June, and my home was in New England. But I decided my work opportunities would be much better here than in Boston. So I decided to stay here, and I went down to the ACS employment office to get some lead on possible jobs. It's hard for my kids to believe it now when I tell them. But when I went down there to the ACS office for employment assistance, they allowed me to use their files, and there were 2 job openings for BS chemists in the Chicago area in June 1947. One was at Bauer and Black, a medical supply company down in the south side of Chicago, and the other was with Treacle Powers at the Portland Cement Association on the near north side of Chicago, Grand Avenue. So I had 2 job opportunities, leads by the ACS office. I had an interview with Bauer Black, and I wasn't too impressed with their opportunity, and I guess they weren't impressed with mine, so that came to naught. But the second one, the final choice I had was with PCA, Portland Cement Association, and I had the interview with Treacle, and he had me come out to his home in Hinsdale for a second interview, and then he offered me the position. So I took it in June 1947. My first job was to knock down a cinder block wall and do some plumbing and electrical work. The laboratory had been closed up during World War II, and they had just gotten authorization to reactivate it. And I was the first junior chemist hired. So my assignment was to knock down brick cinder block walls, put in some electrical lines and some plumbing lines. It was right in the heart of Chicago, but still the unions weren't that active, I guess. So I installed the plumbing and the electrical wiring in that laboratory, and it was reactivated. And Dr. Copeland from the University of Chicago, who worked with Harkins and Ura at the University of Chicago. He was the principal chemist under Trevel in that laboratory, the basic research laboratory, and I was the assistant to Lou Copeland. And was mainly involved in basic physical chemistry studies of Portland cement. And absorption and the BET theory were being used to study the surface area of the hydrates that are formed when Portland cement reacts with water. And Lou Copeland built his own BET apparatus, pretty complicated thing at the time, and was using it to make nitrogen absorption measurements. And I was setting up a water vapor absorption device that Trevel Powers had sort of invented, using McBain balanced sort of port springs. And I became quite adept at repairing broken quartz springs. That was a constant problem with the apparatus. But anyway, in 1952, right after Brunauer left his Navy job, he was hired by Steve Brunauer, by Trevel Powers, to join our basic research group at the Portland Cement Association, and I was selected to be his on-hands lab assistant. So that was in 1952, and I stayed with him until late in 1953.
Now, were people at the Portland Cement Association aware of the problems he had during McCarthyism?
Right, right. They were all aware of it. Everybody was. And Steve had less of a problem with McCarthy than Esther. Esther had more of a problem. But Trevel Powers, I don't know whether you've ever heard of him before.
I've heard, but I have nothing about him, so.
He was a very unusual man. In fact, the three of us, Trevel Powers, Lou Copeland, myself, had something in common. We were all ministers' sons. Trevel's father was a minister out in the western Oregon, I believe. And Lou Copeland's father was a Methodist minister from Iowa. And my father was a Baptist minister from New England. So all three of us in that laboratory were ministers' sons. But Trevel was a very socially conscious person. And one of the first people that he hired after I was there was an X-ray man by the name of Pete Bragg, who was a black who had gotten an advanced, I think it was a master's degree at the time, in X-ray technology. And he was working sorting mail in the post office because people weren't hiring blacks at that time as they are now. So Trevel heard about Peter and looked him up and had him come out for an interview and hired him as our X-ray man. So Trevel went out of his way to be socially active and productive and hired people in that situation. And that's, I'm sure, had something to do with his going after Steve, knowing the situation he was in. So that was Trevel Powers' way of life and his way of doing what he considered to be good.
How did he come to the Portland Cement Association? Do you know?
How did Steve come?
No, Trevel Powers.
Oh, he was there long before World War II and did basic research. Our offices at Portland Cement were on Grand Avenue in Chicago at that time. And he did a lot of basic research before World War II, then he had to shut down the laboratory during the war. And he actually wrote a book that I have a copy of. It's a little bit musty, so don't breathe too deeply. It's been down in my basement.
Now, did you know Ted Browner?
I never met Ted. Ted left during the war and didn't come back, but he was co-author of that book with Trevel.
I met him one time in Baltimore.
Brownyard?
Yes.
Oh. No, I never met Mr. Brownyard. But I thought that was quite a document that they put together describing the physical properties of Portland cement. And he made great use of the brunauer theory. It was a basic part of his development of the procedures. And I'm sure that's why he was aware of what was going on with Stephen and was quick to offer him an opportunity when it looked like he was going to be needing one. So Steve came and I worked with him 14 months. Had a very useful experience for me. He taught me how to do scientific research. I learned from the master. And that's where I kind of set my guidelines for the career. I continued making absorption measurements and surface studies when I went to the next job that I took, which was with the Zonalite laboratory in Evanston. The Zonalite laboratory was part of the Vermiculite industry. I'm not sure how familiar you might be with Vermiculite.
Only know.
It's, you've seen it in the expanded exfoliated form for insulation and for nursery use. It's an extremely interesting mineral. I did water vapor absorption measurements on the ore. As it comes out of the ground, it looks like mica. You can't tell the difference between it and mica, except that if you put the vermiculite in a blowtorch, it exfoliates, it pops, because of the water contained between the mica sheets. And it just pops and makes popcorn and makes a very lightweight insulating material, for which its main purpose. But the water that's between those sheets can be pulled out by desiccation, and the sheets then collapse. The X-ray span, the D-spacing decreases by the width of two water molecules. But then you expose it to relative humidities above about 20%, and it re-expands. So it's a reversible swelling of the mica sheets as water is allowed to be absorbed and then desorbed. And I made the water vapor absorption measurements and saw a type, I think it's a type 4 isotherm, where it stepped, where the first layer of water went in, and then at a certain relative humidity, the second layer would go in. And then the water vapor absorption would stop after the two layers were imbibed by absorption. So it was an extremely interesting mineral. It's a first cousin of montmorillonite, the clay. Montmorillonite is very similar to vermiculite. Now I think that after the second hump it would tail over. I guess that's not a type 4.
Oh, okay. Well,
I haven't worked with the absorption isotherms for a while.
It becomes that.
Okay, so this is where the first layer of water would go into the second layer there. And there was an X-ray man at Argonne by the name of Dr. Sidhu, who made X-ray measurements for me when I did the water absorption work. And he confirmed that there was one spacing for one molecule at this point and two at this point. So it confirmed that we were actually measuring the uptake of two layers of water successfully in the structure. But I might diverse a little bit and add one more thought about vermiculite, because it's one of the things that I always refer to as one of the things that was most interesting in my scientific career. I was going to ion exchange the vermiculite. It contains naturally calcium ions in those ion exchange positions on the clay surface, but it can be exchanged for sodium ions by putting the calcium-formed vermiculite into a brine solution. So I was going to convert some of the vermiculite that I had, the ore, into the sodium form, and then have a material that would be useful for ion exchange pickup of other ions. And so I soaked some of the vermiculite ore in a beaker of brine solution all day. When I went home that evening, I poured the brine solution off and left the mica flakes in a beaker under a tap of running water. I came in the next day and that beaker, which had maybe a third full of vermiculite ore flakes when I started, when I came in the next morning, the beaker had become full of vermiculite, and a lot of it had spilled over into the sink. I had observed what I deduced to be an osmotic swelling of the vermiculite. The flakes imbibed the salt solution, and then, when put in fresh water, the osmotic action caused the flakes to swell as they sucked in water, and those flakes just puffed up as if they had been heat exfoliated. I was just flabbergasted. There was nothing in the literature at the time indicating that such would happen. So I was quite surprised, and the next time the company consultant came around for a visit, he was Professor Godine from MIT. He had a reputation as being the father of flotation technology, and he was one of our high-powered consultants. So when Professor Godine came in on the next visit, I showed him my little osmotic swelling of vermiculite, and he just about fell off his chair. He was flabbergasted. He said, you know, what you have is a new mineral beneficiation procedure. We can improve the quality of vermiculite ore being shipped from the mines if we separate it from the non-swellable gangue minerals by this osmotic action, and ship a 100% pure vermiculite concentrate to the places where it is subsequently exfoliated thermally. And he got real excited about it, and we got a patent, finally got the patent issued on the beneficiation of vermiculite ore. We tried it out one winter down in South Carolina at one of the mines on carload quantities, and it worked beautifully. And that patent with Professor Godine, I will always cherish as a real unusual patent to have with somebody of his standing. But it was, I thought, a very interesting observation. And Professor Godine was sure that there is going to be other minerals that will respond to such treatment, and the technology for beneficiation can be probably applied to other minerals. Well, Professor Godine lived about 10 years after that, and in that time and since then, I've been scratching my head all the time, looking for other minerals that might respond to that action, and have never found one. So it was extremely unique and limited in its potential application, but still it was an observation that I thought was unusual and interesting to recall. But Professor Godine was a very ambitious person. He thought he had all kinds of opportunities to apply that technology to other minerals, but neither he nor I were ever able to expand it beyond our vermiculite concentrate. So, to say, it was an interesting episode.
Now, did Powers normally invite people that he interviewed to his home, or was it a unique situation with him?
Well, I think I at the time was a student at Wheaton, and Wheaton and Hinsdale are not that far apart. I can't recall any other reason why he would have invited me. He was just a very outgoing person and very friendly, and I can't think of any other reason why he would have invited me. All I remember is he gave instructions to his wife, Triesta, to fix me a drink, but he said, nothing hard. He knew I was from Wheaton, so he insisted on nothing hard. But he was a very nice man to work for, and I enjoyed.
What did he do during the Second World War?
I think he was writing the book.
Oh.
The laboratory had been shut down, and I think he was spending his time writing the book. But he retired in the early 70s, and my wife and I were on a vacation trip out to Arizona, and we decided to stop in it. We had taken my youngest son to Colorado to school, and we went down to Durango and then to Mesa Verde, and we decided to spend the night at the lodge at Mesa Verde. And we pulled in and went into the lodge for dinner that evening, and we're sitting at the table enjoying a meal, and all of a sudden somebody came and tapped me on the shoulder. I looked, and there was Trevel Powers. He and his wife had stopped there on their way back from a trip to Detroit to visit their daughter. And he recognized me. I hadn't noticed him. So we had a little social evening together, and we called him what had happened in the interim since we'd seen each other, which had been, by then, about 15 years, I think, since we had seen each other before. And he had retired to someplace south of Phoenix, Arizona. I don't know exactly what the town was. It was some rather famous retirement community that he, in Trieste, retired to. But I haven't had any contact with him since that one day at Mesa Verde. But he was very healthy, and his father, I think, lived to be over 90. So I would expect that maybe Trevel is still alive and could be looked up. I'm sure if he is, that Portland Cement would still have the records where he could be located. If you want to talk to Trevel.
Yeah, I will. See if I can find out.
Because I'm sure he, if anybody would live to be 90, he's a good candidate. But there's something else I was going to... Oh, I was going to ask, is Steve still alive?
No.
He has
He died in 87, I believe it was.
87. Because he would have been 90 at this point.
Yes.
When he came to PCA, his hair was completely white. He was at that time 50 years old. So he got prematurely aged looking.
And bald.
Bald, and what hair he had was very white. So I would have been surprised if he was still alive, because I lost contact once he went to Clarkson.
Mm-hmm.
I saw him once at a Gordon research conference, but hadn't seen him since.
Now, how did Lou Copeland come to Portland Cement Association?
He was a student of Harkins, I believe, at the University of Chicago, and specialized in, I think I have a bibliography of him here. Biography, I mean, yeah, Lou Copeland's background is shown there. He had been with U.S. Rubber, I believe. And I think his coming to PCA was probably a result of Trevel Powers looking for a senior research chemist who had some interest in specializing in surface phenomena. That's probably why he located Lou Copeland. I have some papers from the time when I was working at, I don't know if you've seen, how many of these you've seen.
I think I've made a copy of that. But
You're welcome to any of these that you don't have if you would like.
Well, I would take them and make copy and send them back to you.
Okay.
I've done this with other material.
Those are papers that were in preparation while I was there. But, I think I have duplicates on most of them, so you don't have to worry about returning them.
Well, just to make sure I would.
Okay. The other reprint I had was from Victor Dietz. I don't know if you, did you know Victor?
Yes?
He was an associate of Stephen when Stephen was in Washington, D.C. And I was working on surface phenomena at the Zonalite company after I left PCA and had some questions about some technology. And I arranged a trip east. I went to a college symposium, I believe, in Rensselaer, Polytech. And on the way, I stopped to see some people that Stephen gave me an introduction to. One of whom was Sterling Hendricks.
Oh, okay.
Sterling was a very interesting person. He was working still at the Bureau of Agriculture, Department of Agriculture. He was working on the use of various wavelengths of light to accelerate plant growth, control plant growth. He was also apparently a very avid mountain climber. Getting ready to go on an expedition climbing out in the Tetons, I believe.
Now, Sterling,
Hendricks?
Yeah. What sort of person was he?
He very, very friendly. I think he took me to dinner that night. And
He was still at the
Department of Agriculture.
Department of Agriculture. Right. And this was after the war? This was obviously in the 1950s.
Yeah, this was after I had left PCA and I'd gone to this Zonalite company because I was working on absorption phenomena. And I think the main reason for the trip was to talk to Victor Dietz because Victor had published a paper describing a technique for measuring nitrogen surface area that didn't require high vacuum. He had, as I recall, 2 globes of mercury and would pass the nitrogen mixture over the adsorbent by raising and lowering these mercury flasks, and the mercury would push the nitrogen vapor back and forth across the sample. And that's about all the details I can remember. But I thought it was very interesting, and I was working for the Zonalite company. We didn't have very much expertise in glass blowing and very little money to spend on fancy equipment like the regular BET. So that device of Victor Dietz intrigued me, and I wanted to go talk to him and learn more about it. So that's one of the reasons I made the trip. And Stephen introduced me to Victor because they're a long-term association. And he said I ought to go see Sterling Hendricks too, so I did. But that device of Victor Dietz worked out fine. I built one at the Zonalite lab and used it for making nitrogen absorption measurements. The bargain basement method. But Victor at the time was working on a huge bibliography of solid adsorbents. He had stacks of papers and stuff on his desk where he was compiling all of its literature reference to absorption work. And I think book was eventually published. I don't recall ever seeing it, but I think it was eventually published. And I don't know whether Victor is still alive or not.
He was, I don't know now.
Yeah. But he was an interesting man to talk with. He was at the NBS out in Silver Springs, Maryland. But Sterling wrote a book that I was using on clays, because I was working with vermiculite. And montmorillonite is the first cousin of vermiculite. And so that pamphlet by Sterling Hendricks was a Bible to me. There's been a lot of work in the last 10 years or so involving clay technology, pillared clays designed for catalytic applications have been the subject of quite a bit of research in the last 10 years. You asked earlier if, when Stephen came to Portland Cement, if people were aware of his situation. I'm sure they were, that's my recollection. But it was not a topic for discussion. It was very studiously avoided to avoid embarrassing. But there was a book published by William Buckley. Have you seen that?
Yes.
I had a copy that I bought. This is a long time after I was associated with Steve. It came out in the early 60s, I believe. And I was just curious because I'd heard second and third hand about Esther's affiliation with Alger Hiss and so on. So I was curious and bought the volume just to satisfy my curiosity. I think it was coincidental that something about Alger Hiss came out this week in the news. At the same time, my recollection of Alger Hiss was brought to the surface by your phone call. So that's a coincidence, because I haven't given Alger Hiss or Esther Brunauer any thought for 20 years. And all of a sudden, they're both there. But Buckley's a pretty fair person, and he seems to feel that McCarthy overdid what he did. And I also have a copy of did I show you this?
Yep. I got the
B and BET. This is the
Yep.
book from the ACS. You may have seen it or have a copy of it.
Yeah, I have. Well, I have seen it. I don't have a copy, but. Now, what was Stephen when he came to work there? Was at that time did he seem to be depressed by the events, or was he? Yeah, I realize if you don't know someone before, it's hard to tell, but.
No, he seemed to be, he entered into all the conversations at lunch and whenever we'd be together and outside events, like everybody else. He didn't seem to be particularly depressed, although at the time I didn't even know what depressed meant, what the definition of depression. No, he seemed to be, he wasn't extremely, I don't know what the word would be to use, exuberant, or he wasn't the type who would go around playing practical jokes and telling stories. He was very serious-minded. But he had Mary and I at his home in Evanston for dinner one night. And his wife did all the cooking, except his mother was alive at the time. and prepared the desserts, the Hungarian desserts that were pretty famous. And I don't recall Esther being particularly depressed either. She was very sociable and pleasant to talk to. So that's the only contact with her I had.
And she was here at that time?
She was here, yes. And they bought a home in Evanston. And that's where they entertained us. He also, I believe, was a member of the First Baptist Church in Evanston. I think it was either the First Baptist or First Methodist.
It was Baptist.
I thought it was First Baptist. There was something I was going to ask you. There was a man that Luke Copeland referred to frequently, Steve Brunauer referred to frequently. I had never run across him, never met him, never had any familiarity with his work, but his name was Gamoth.
Oh, George Gamoth?
George Gamoth.
Yes.
Where was he? I didn't fit it. I can't fit him into the...
Okay. He was at Johns Hopkins University.
Okay. And that's where Emmett was.
No. Well, Emmett taught courses and Steve taught courses there.
Yeah. Okay.
That's where Teller was.
Yeah, okay.
George Gamoth came to the United States, and his condition for coming was that he could bring someone else with him.
I see.
And that someone was Ed Teller.
Oh.
And so Teller taught a course, and Brunauer attended it.
Oh,
And that's how the BET started.
That's interesting.
Then during the Second World War, Gamoth became a consultant under Brunauer.
At the Navy Department.
Yes.
I see.
Yeah, he was one of the first to explain how the sun developed its energy.
Oh, this hydrogen cycle.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And he and Teller worked together at George Washington. And then he started writing these popular books.
As I say, the name came back to me as I was thinking about my little history of Stephen. The name Gamoth kept coming up, and I just couldn't place him where he fit into the overall picture. But I remember it was a name that was commonly bandied around when Steve and Copeland and Powers and so on talked.
He was apparently a very outgoing, lively person. Liked parties. And
oh, just the opposite of Steve. Steve was much more reserved, I thought. Oh, one more thing I was going to mention while you were here. Something that I am occupying a lot of my time doing now. After I retired, I had a whole stack of C&E News. I collected them while working. I never had time to read them, so I just had a pile here and a pile there. So one of my first projects when I retired was to thin that pile down, go through and clip anything that I wanted to save. I was going through this volume. It was the Centennial volume, and I ran across this picture of Charles Chandler. He and his brother were the founders of the American Chemical Society. Well, I'm of the Chandler family.
oh, you are?
My mother was the last in our line of Chandlers. And she had this genealogy of the family that she had had for many years. And she willed it to me because I was carrying Chandler as my middle name. So I got my old Chandler genealogy out, and sure enough, he's in our tree. There's the reference there. Down at the bottom of the page, I believe it. Is it?
Was Frank or?
No, it's Charles Chandler.
Oh, okay, yes.
4550 was the number.
Oh, he graduated from in Germany.
So I found that the Chandler from the American Chemical Society was from the same tree that I'm from, and so that created a little curiosity, and I've been making a more detailed study now of the family records and family history. And his brother was a professor at Lehigh University that apparently generated quite a bit of fame in his tenure at Lehigh. I stopped at Lehigh on one of my trips east to talk with Al Zettelmeyer. Had lunch with Al and Frank Healy, I believe, and a couple others. But at the time, I didn't know of the Chandler being part of the family of chemists there at Lehigh, or I would have asked Al Zettelmeyer to show me where his office was. Well, anyway, just this last couple of years, I've had a little consulting job for a company here in Palatine that's dealing in catalyst development. And they're dealing with a geologist from Lehigh University that I've had to have phone conversations with. And I asked this geologist to check into what is there at Lehigh about the family history of the Chandlers. And he really went all out. He and the librarian got copies of some of their publications that were honoring the Chandler that was there. It designed a chemistry building that's still there and being used. So I'm filling in a lot of the holes in the family background that contained chemists that I wasn't even aware of. So that's been a project from my retirement that's going to not let my kids die ignorant of the fact that they had a long shoestring relative that was active in chemical circles. But it's been interesting, and I've found that there are a lot of other very famous Chandlers that pop up when you start looking at the genealogies. One of them, a cousin of my great-grandfather, was this Boston merchant that founded the Chandler stores in Boston. And he donated $50,000 to start a school of engineering at Dartmouth. It was originally called the Chandler School of Engineering. It now apparently is the Thayer School of Engineering. But he was the original endower for that engineering school at Dartmouth. So it was another one of the Chandlers that I've found that embellished the tree a little bit. So that's been one of my main projects in retirement, is to put together a lot of this family history and the roots and so on for our children and grandchildren. Oh, there's something else to show you. I guess I didn't bring it out. I can't remember what it was now. I think I've probably just about hit all the main things about Steve that I can recall.
When he first came there, did he spend much time in the lab, or was he mostly in the office?
He was at his desk most of the time. He took on a project studying the surface energy of solid materials. Using heats of solution, measure the heat of solution of some solids that were part of cement chemistry, dicalcium and tricalcium silicates, tricalcium aluminates, and so on. And then measure the difference in heats of solution or total energy evolved calorimetrically when the solids are measured at different stages of crystallization. And then working back, able to come up with a surface energy for the solid based on the fact that it contains certain amount of crystalline, a certain amount of amorphous material. And that was his main thrust. And at the time, he thought he was breaking really new ground. There had been some surface energy studies made of calcium fluoride, I believe, or sodium fluoride, one other solid, had been described in the literature. But he was going to do it for some of the major compounds in Portland cement. And I would be the one to handle the sample preparation and the delivery to the lab that did the heat solution work. And I did the water vapor absorption, and Luke Copeland was doing the nitrogen absorption in conjunction with him. But he was putting it all together.
Now, what was the relationship between Luke Copeland and Steve?
They were an equal footing with powers. I think they both had the same titles. Senior research chemist, I believe, were their titles. And they were working cooperatively on this basic research, trying to understand what goes on with Portland cement hydrates. And that is an extension of the work that Trevel Powers had started before World War II, in which has been summarized in his book.
Now, how would Stephen interact with you? How closely and
well,
what way?
his desk was there, and mine was over in this part of the room, and we conversed back and forth across the room. The office we had was about 2/3 the size of this kitchen. It was a fairly small office. But he had his desk there, and I had mine over in the corner. And we would converse on and off all day long. It was a very close relationship. And as I say, I enjoyed it because I was learning things, and what I learned I was able to find uses for later. But he wanted me to work with Irving Klotz at Northwestern, because I had a bachelor's degree at the time, but I had been taking coursework at night at Northwestern University. They had a campus downtown to do my master's work. And I had to do my thesis work and choose a professor. And Steve apparently knew Irving Klotz very well and was trying to encourage me to work with Irving Klotz. But I had a fairly extensive working relationship with Fred Basolo from the coursework that I was taking. And Fred was looking for graduate students and had some projects. I decided to go with Fred Basolo. And so I did my master's work with Fred. And Fred Basolo turned out to be quite a productive person. He was a very wonderful person to work with. I was doing work that involved rate studies, racemization rates for various compounds and complex compounds. And I lived in Chicago on the north side. And these rate studies I'd make during the daytime and usually go up in the evening and make a rate measurement. But on weekends, Fred lived in Evanston. He said he was going to be going to a play or something. He said, I'll stop over to the lab and take your reading for you at midnight. I thought, that's pretty wide of him. Take time to go over to the lab and make a measurement on my racemization rate equipment. So I wouldn't have to drive all the way up there from Chicago to make the measurement. He did that all the time I was doing my research work. I thought that was a pretty nice guy to work with that would do that. And he's made quite a name for himself.
How did Stephen take your not following his suggestion and picking your own research professor?
Well, he realized it was my choice, and he I think, had just offered Irving Close as somebody if I wanted
Oh.
his help in getting somebody. He offered Irving Close, but he kind of pushed this because of his relationship with him. But he understood that I was having to field a project that I thought I could handle, and the one that Fred had sounded to me a little bit more down my line. So, but Fred was also a very nice person. I was, I think, gifted in the people that I ended up having to help me in my career. People like Steve Brunauer, Fred DeSolo, Vladimir Hensel, and the last one was Murray Good. But, and also Professor Godin at MIT. I had a chance during my career to become associated with and meet quite a few people with really outstanding talents. And I think they kept my spirits up and encouraged me and made what I did with my career a lot more satisfying.
Now, when you were working with Steve, did he come into the lab, or did he just more or less talk to you and let you go to the lab?
He would come into the lab. I had an apparatus in the lab for measuring the water vapor absorption, a series of McBain balances. And if I had any sort of trouble, he would be right there to try to give me advice and help. He was very helpful.
Now, was he a good experimentalist, or did he put his hands on the equipment?
At the time he was with the Portland Cement, he didn't do first-hand equipment work to my best recollection. It was mainly overseeing and writing and calculating. He did a lot of calculating. It was back in the days when you didn't have little handheld computers. Back in the days when what we had was a Marchant calculator, grind out multiplication. And I'll never forget Lou Copeland doing a least square. It would take him all afternoon for coffee break till the time we went home to run a least square analysis of a set of 15 numbers of data, just to crank it out. The squeeze square was really doing it the hard way with the old Marchant calculator. Noisy thing and slow and required a lot of input compared to what you can do now with a handheld computer. We had to do it the hard way.
Now, Stephen and his wife had a rather unconventional lifestyle. Were people at the lab or were you aware that he had girlfriends in addition, or was that?
No, I didn't know anything about that. No, he just didn't strike me as being a person who would be afflicted with that kind of a accusation. No, he just seemed to be serious-minded. They had two lovely daughters that we met. I've forgotten their names.
Kathy and Betty.
Yeah. I don't know where they are now.
Kathy is still in Evanston, and
She is?
Betty's in Centralia.
Oh, they're still around here. I wasn't sure whatever happened to them.
Now, he became more religious when he came to Evanston. Did he talk about that, or was it within himself?
Within himself. I learned that he was a member of the First Baptist Church. I think he told me that he had just joined the First Baptist Church, but there wasn't any subsequent follow-up discussions about it. Religion wasn't a general topic of work environments.
Mm-hmm. Did he reveal himself, or was he pretty much work and that was it?
The only time he revealed himself was the day that I decided I was going to go to the Vermiculite company, I trying to figure out how to break the news to him. And when I did, his reaction kind of surprised me. He rolled back in his chair, rolled completely over. Scary situation, scary response. But he didn't hurt himself, but he just got shaken up and embarrassed.
Well, why did you leave?
Well, Portland Cement Association was what was called a non-profit organization. It was built and on the principle that they weren't going to be in the marketplace making money. They were there to serve an industry. And therefore they fit the qualifications of the state laws regarding regulations of business. They didn't have to pay every 2 weeks or every week. We got a check once a month. And the checks were not particularly generous. I know when I went to work there, my monthly check was $235 a month. And having been there since 1947, my pay had advanced to as much as $270 a month. $35 a month pay raise over a period of 3 or 4 years isn't a very healthy pay raise. But that was the times. So this company in Evanston, the Vermiculite company, had gotten some authorization to expand their research staff. And so they were looking for a chemist, and I don't know how they contacted me, but I got a phone call and asked if I'd be interested in being interviewed for a job opening. And they offered me $400 a month. Going from $270 to $400 was a huge raise. I thought I was rich all of a sudden. So it was money primarily. And that was the driving force. There wasn't any other reason. And I maintained contact with Stephen and Retrieval Powers thereafter in New Copeland.
But you didn't go to Stephen's parties with the Hungarian friends, or?
No, I had no social interaction at that level at all. But as I understand it, those were mainly in Washington when he was in the Navy, and they were entertaining some of their Hungarian contacts, according to what Senator Joe McCarthy said. I have only that. I never saw any other Hungarians or heard about any parties or any interactions at all. I was out of the loop, I guess, if there was a loop.
But you worked for him for the first year he was at the Portland Cement
Right.
Association. Was anyone else working for him, or were you the only one?
I was the only one during that 14 months that I was there. And subsequently, others worked for him. Well, actually, Steve Bragg, this black I told you about, the X-ray man, worked with Steve to the extent he did the X-ray work for Steve whenever X-ray samples were to be analyzed.
Now, apparently during this time he wrote a reasonably long article that I was able to get an article on about why God would make someone suffer. And so...
Steve wrote that?
Yes. So from that I gathered he was rather...
Anti-religious?
No, he was asking the question, presumably from the suffering he went through from McCarthyism.
I never saw that, or I never even heard of that. I guess my relationship with him, aside from that dinner at his home with Esther and the girls and his mother, my relationship with him was primarily business, completely.
Well, now apparently he didn't get paid an excessive salary at the Portland Cement Association. Did he ever comment on that, or?
No, I can't recall. No, he left to go to Clarkson some years after I left, so maybe that was because of the salary, I don't know.
Although I do recall one time someone told me that they visited him in Evanston, and he said that McCarthy did him a favor because by leaving the Navy he got more money. So
He had a pretty huge house in Evanston. I don't recall it being particularly fancy, but it was very huge. But that was the style of homes in that part of Evanston where he bought.
did his mother speak English, or was she just speaking Hungarian?
You're asking me something that's too far back in history.
To remember?
To remember. She was just, I would say, friendly and nondescript as far as outstanding features. Except she did have some good Hungarian desserts that she made.
And you didn't maintain a lot of contact with what Steve was doing in his work after you left. It was more just person to person.
Person to person. I had some contact with him when I heard that Emmett Teller was going to be in Wheaton. I called him and asked if he would like to have me pick him up because I was planning on going. So I went to pick him up, and I picked up he and Lou Copeland both. And we went out to Wheaton to listen to Teller. And there were just a few exchanges between them afterwards. There was no lengthy or no hearty get-together. It was
did he ever talk about the Navy in the year that you were with him, or?
No, that was a subject that never came up. I was very, very careful not to outside agency of that sort in his office or questioning any of us that worked with him.
Did he ever talk about Emmett or the agriculture?
When he first came, he gave the whole department a review of how the BET theory came into being when he was working in the fixed nitrogen laboratory at the Department of Agriculture. And he went through stepwise the derivation of the theory and the equation. But that's about all I can remember.
Did he go into the various contributions of each of the three people, or it was just the theory itself?
I remember he ascribed the mathematical part to Teller, and the driving force to do it was attributed to Emmett, who was his boss, I believe.
Yeah, he hired Stephen.
Yeah. Would you like some more coffee?
I'm fine.
I wished I had had a chance to meet Emmett more, because apparently he was quite a man and contributed an awful lot to science and catalysis in general.
He was very friendly, got along well with everyone that he ever met, as far as I know. He just was. I was a postdoc with him for a year and a half, so,
I didn't know that, at Johns Hopkins.
yes. Yeah. Last time that I saw him was when the Seattle ACS meeting.
Oh,
I went early, and so I went down and visited him on Saturday and Sunday.
oh, I didn't know he was there at the Seattle meeting.
No, he didn't, but he was in Portland,
Oh, I see.
and so I went to Portland
Okay.
and
Because Herman Pines was there at the meeting.
yes. How did you get to UOP?
Well, I was working for the Zonalite company, and the company was having a bad year. Their sales of insulation were down, and there was a manager of the company that oversaw the South Carolina mines that I would go down and consult with periodically, stay at the Poinsett Hotel in Greenville, South Carolina, and have breakfast with this Joe Kelly. And frequently this John Myers from Libby, Montana, where our other mines were. And Joe Kelly mentioned something at the breakfast that morning to Joe Myers. Asked him when he was going to cut off all that hemorrhaging of his profits that were taking place from the research lab in Evanston. I was there at the table, the director of research was there, and I got the message. So as soon as we got back to Evanston, I started looking around for what might be available. And I went to see Dr. Basolo, and he offered me his recommendation and suggested that I talk to Portland Cement Association because he knew that they were, not to UOP, because they knew that they were looking for expansion of some of their research. So I went over and I talked to Herman Block and somebody else, Jack Murray, I think. And they hired me to be part of their basic research department on catalysis on the basis of my knowledge of surface phenomena and experience in making measurements of the surface area. They knew that I had something that had some connection with catalysis, so I was maybe a little bit ahead of other possible candidates for that reason. So they hired me, and I started off there. I think it was $700 a month. It was a big increase over the 400.
When did you start with UOP?
1957.
And who did you work with when you first started?
When I first started, I worked with Ed Bisek on catalysis. B-I-C-E-K. He left the company about 3 years later, and I took over the job that he had, working directly under Vladimir Hensel.
Uh-huh.
Actually, I worked under Ernie Politzer,
Oh, okay.
who worked for Hensel. But it was kind of a bilateral leadership, because Hensel would call me to his office as often as Ernie would. So I was working for both Vladimir and Ernie Politzer. I'm trying to come up with better platinum catalysts and work on the support material that we were using, and found that to be as interesting as the catalysis part. I learned how to make alumina fibers, which we got quite a few patents on, but never commercialized. But it was a very exciting development. The president of the company sent a note to Vladimir suggesting that there would be a market for alumina fiber materials for upholstery for airplanes to be non-inflammable and so on. And there ought to be a way you can make fibers out of aluminum. Well, we found a way. Didn't take very long. And we were well on the way to considering commercial development until we found out how much spinneret technology we would have to acquire or invest in. And some market appraisals that were made did not come back with any glowing reports of huge markets waiting. So the desire to commercialize was never undertaken seriously. So the project just remains a technical success, but a commercial untry. But other companies since then have commercialized aluminum fibers. And some of them were made by a technique that was similar to the one that we developed. And it was, I think, a very potentially useful product, but we never did exploit.
Research organizations have personalities like people. How would you describe the research personality of the three organizations you worked with?
I would say Portland's UOP had the best, most complete, well-rounded, and variety of projects to work on, and the ability to operate independently was much better at UOP than any place else.
How large was PCA when you were there?
When I first went there, it was a little square building down on Grand Avenue, across from the American Medical Association building on Grand Avenue. And total 5-floor office had maybe a total of 100 people. But then they built this laboratory building in Skokie, and we moved out there and expanded the staff. And when I left UOP, PCA, I think there was probably a research and development organization of 150 people. It's grown more since then.
Where did they get their funding from mostly?
All the Portland cement producing companies in the country that made Portland cement and sold it by the barrel paid 1/4 cent a barrel or something like that into this fund, which was used to support a lot of activities, including the research laboratory. One of the points that Trevel Prowers used to always make was it's a good place to work because it is not a cyclical operation. We don't depend upon the profits this year to pay next year's bills. It goes into a sinking fund, and we withdraw a certain percentage of that each year, good year or bad year, so that the work continues at a constant level of effort instead of fluctuating. That was one of the selling points of Portland Cement Association.
And how many of those 100 people would have been in research when you were there?
I would say 75 or 80. The research was not all basic research. There was a lot of practical research. They were working on pre-stressed concrete at the time, and had a big device for stressing concrete and then measuring the fracture rates. And they had a lot of work on frost-free concrete, the air entrained.
How fast did Stephen become versed in concrete after he came to the association since he had never worked in it before? Or what did he do when he first got there?
He jumped right in and went after the compounds which had been identified, tricalcium silicate, dicalcium silicate, and those species which had been identified. He immediately was able to compartmentalize them into their categories and their functions.
How would you describe him in doing research? What was his strong point?
Very, very careful, considered, not snap judgment, wants to be sure of everything. Check and double check. He was very open to ideas and suggestions by other people, and went to others for assistance frequently. Willing to give credit to people.
Was he forceful or reserved? Or, well, I guess you can be both, but...
I would say he was reserved, but not flippant. He was careful, and I think if I were to list the qualities that I would attribute to him, it would be basic honesty and frankness, and careful and cooperative.
Well, what would be weaknesses? And I never put anything in writing without sending it to people, so I'll go back and put this in writing and send it to you.
Well, I think if he had a little more sense of humor, it might have made him a little bit more appreciated. That's where he seemed to be lacking a little bit. He seemed to be very serious, but this may have been a result of circumstances. Excuse me for a second.
Mm-hmm.
retired, they gave me this memento for my years at UOP. And these are some of the fibers that we made.
That's the alumina fibers?
That's the aluminum fibers. Started off with this material. And ended up with the fibers. By a very interesting series of chemical phenomena. And I consider this one of my proudest achievements.
Is it a proprietary process, or?
Well, we got patents on it.
Oh, so
But
then,
the patents are just about expired now. They go back to the late 60s. So the patents were never activated, and the project was never commercialized. But at the time I did this work, there was no such thing as aluminum fiber. But since then, DuPont and I believe some other companies have come up with aluminum fibers which are being marketed now.
is that the oxide or the metal over
This
there?
is metal.
Uh-huh.
Start with metal, and procedure is to go through, first of all, making a sol from the metal by reacting in deficient HCl. You got an aluminum sol produced, which is a polymer unit, and the sol can be concentrated, and as it gets concentrated, it gets very sticky. So when we were told to learn how to make fibers, it meant stringing out some species, and I found that very concentrated aluminum sol was very sticky, and like chewing gum, you put it between your fingers and snap your finger, and there's a fiber. And I could grab it and made the first fibers this way. And after calcination, they retained the flexibility.
What is the surface area? High?
It's typical of aluminum fibers, I would say 150 square meters per gram. Depending upon the calcination conditions. But they will absorb dyes that are anionically charged, like I think methyl orange and other dyes, because there's anion exchange on the aluminum surface. But after learning how to do it and learning that fibers remain flexible after calcination, we then went to the next step, which to form a strand that could be spun in a homemade spinneret and wound on a mandrel. And we made quite a bit of progress quite quickly, and we're well on the way, I thought, to commercializing it, but as I say, the marketing people didn't think there was a big enough market to justify the investment, so it ended up in one of my souvenirs for retirement. But it was interesting anyway. It was one of the more interesting developments.
Now, how would you describe Politzer?
He was a capable administrator, quite easy to work with. He had some good ideas on catalysis, but he wasn't quite as easy as some people to accept other people's ideas. I thought he was a little bit more provincial.
Now, was he mostly administrative, or was he both research and administrative?
He was mostly administrative. He had a crew. He had people like myself working and reporting directly to him. And there were people working in the hydrocracking area that reported directly to him. And he reported directly to Val Hensel. But there was also, Val was quite a, he would be down in the laboratory and every morning make his rounds and throw suggestions around and encouragement. So it was kind of a two-headed leadership organization.
Now, Pulitzer gave a lot of presentations.
Yes.
Was this by company design or by his initiative, or?
Well, in all frankness, I think a lot of it was maybe his initiative. I know that we wrote a joint paper, Hensel, Pulitzer, and myself, on reforming, to be given at the Moscow meeting, the International Catalysis meeting in Moscow in 1971. And Hensel couldn't go because he was worried about his visa arrangements at the time, so Hensel decided not to go to that meeting, and Pulitzer was to go and present the paper. And I felt that the paper was based 80% on work that I had done, and I hadn't done very much traveling up until that point. I had never been to Moscow. So I asked Ernie if I couldn't join him in the trip to Moscow for that meeting. And he said that he didn't think it could be swung. And it was important enough to me at the time. So I went to see Val, and Val said he'd take care of it. We were going to go. So that you asked about the initiative. He was displaying at that time, I think, the initiative that he wanted to present it instead of the company telling him to. And he wasn't too excited about having to share the trip with a neophyte like myself. So. But I got to go anyway because Val Hensel told me to go ahead and make plans.
How was Hensel in his management and research?
Hensel was very, very effective. All he had to do was make a suggestion, and boy, it was done. Hensel was a person that you didn't want to cross, because he was all behind you and all for you as long as you were doing what he thought you should be doing, and you didn't want to violate that unwritten arrangement. But he was very effective at getting things done. He would make the rounds every morning. He and Herman Block would make the rounds through the pilot plant area, talking to all the engineers in the pilot plant area, through the research areas, particularly the third floor where the basic research was being done on catalysis. Stop and talk to everybody and give everybody a little prod and a little encouragement, but also a lot of recognition when they did things that were productive. So he was a very good person to work for. I enjoyed working for Val completely.
Did anyone ever cross him?
Oh yes, people did cross him.
And stay there, or?
Well, there was one chemist, I won't name names because I would certainly hate to be wrong on any aspect of it, so I'll be careful not to name names, but there was an occasion where a list of prominent people in the oil industry from an API meeting were going to be coming through the laboratory on a visit. And it was Val's job to make sure that all the areas were properly policed and cleaned up and presentable to a group of outsiders, which included a lot of the hood space. The hood space usually was a source of all kinds of accumulations. People didn't know what to do with the chemical they throw in the hood. And so when it came hood cleaning time, it was usually quite a laborious task. And this was even before the days when we now have to account for every drop of chemical. But this one chemist was responsible for one of the laboratory hoods. And he decided that he was above any lab cleaning jobs. He had a PhD and wore a white coat, and it was above his level to have to get down and dirty and clean out a dirty old hood, so he refused to do it. And Val was making his last inspection of the day, went to this one hood, and he turned to this chemist and said that that hood needed to be cleaned up. And the response from the chemist wasn't particularly diplomatic, and Hansel left. Shortly thereafter, the chemist left for the day. Val was back in the lab, rolled up his sleeves, and Val went to work on that hood. Shortly thereafter, that chemist went to work someplace else. Now that's a very frank description of what can happen in certain organizations, and the people that were involved in that know who was being referred to. But
yeah, the story is equally good without an individual's name.
all right. And there was another individual that I will not name that kind of led to an interesting episode in my career. I'd studied a lot of Emmett's books. P.H. Emmett wrote this whole series on catalysis. And I spent a lot of time in reading Paul's books on catalysis and other books that people had written on, in the field of catalysis to learn techniques and so on. But one day, this chemist suggested to me that Lindy had just come out with a brand new material they were going to market. It was a platinum on molecular sieves, wherein the platinum had been dispersed on the sieve support by ion exchange, and therefore represented the most atomically dispersed platinum anybody could ever come up with, and therefore it ought to be the most stable and active platinum catalyst. It was put on by apparently putting on a cationic form of platinum on the cation exchanged zeolite surface. And it sounded good. Those of us that just threw the chlorobenzenic acid on alumina, this sounded like they've got us beat hands down. They're going to be putting the platinum on now atom by ion exchange. There's no way we can match it. This was the story I was getting. Why don't we try making some of our own, get some cationic platinum and make the cationic exchanged platinum on the zeolite and see how we can get a real active catalyst. So I went home with that suggestion, and I couldn't help but think that evening, we're already putting the platinum on by ion exchange, anion exchange, because the alumina has an anion exchange capacity. We don't have to go to a cation form and put it on a cation exchange material to achieve what was claimed, because we're apparently already doing it. Well, I took off in that vein and reported back to the person who suggested to me that we should follow Lindy's suggestion. I said, why should we? We're already putting our platinum on by ion exchange. And the response I got was negative. It can't be because there's no ion exchange on alumina. Well, that set me off on the project that lasted for several more years. I learned firsthand that alumina is an amphoteric material, and at certain pH ranges it's anion exchangeable, other pH ranges is cation. And this is a very common material for catalyst supports. Certainly somebody in the literature must have described ion exchange in connection with making platinum catalysts. So I went back and went through all those volumes of Emmett's, all the other volumes on catalyst preparation technology, everything I could find in our library shelf on catalyst synthesis to find someone that would say something about ion exchange principles in the design and preparation of catalytic materials on alumina. Not a word. I couldn't find a word. As if there had been no recognition in the literature by people that make catalysts and publish that there's such a thing as ion exchange on alumina that is normally, inadvertently involved when you start making a catalyst from ionic materials. Well, that was, take my word for it, news at UOP. And I caught hell about that over the next 2 or 3 years. I was told at one time that don't ever mention anion exchange again. I've heard all we want to hear about anion exchange. It got to be that, but I was right, and I have been right ever since. And now you see it acknowledged. But the first time I saw it in print was over in London at the catalyst meeting. There was a paper by some IFP catalyst manufacturers. I can't remember the name of the author, but the author was describing the preparation of various catalysts on alumina involving iridium, platinum, palladium, and they mentioned in more than one place in the article the use of anion exchange principles in order to deposit iridium complexes and platinum complexes on these alumina support. And they used the word right out in print, anion exchange. Well, I was just ready to hit the ceiling when I saw that. Here is finally somebody has acknowledged in the literature. And maybe I just missed it, I don't know, but I went through what I thought was a thorough search of catalyst literature prior to that period, which was about 68, no.
64. Let's see, it was Philadelphia and then Paris.
And then London.
Then London. So
it was in London where I saw
64.
Okay, it was 1964 when I first saw a paper describing anion exchange as a part of catalyst preparation. And we were using it all the time and have used it since. People that understand ion exchange principles have used it to design catalysts. They select an anion if they're going to put it on aluminum in an acid solution. If you want to put it on a cation surface, you do it at a higher pH and use a cation for it. But the invoking ion exchange as a principle in depositing metals on alumina surface just wasn't part of the technology. Maybe you know more, I don't know, but
no.
That's the impression I have. I have that article from the London meeting. I can dig for it. But that was the first time I had seen in print anybody admitting that there was any such thing. And I didn't have the nerve to bring that article to the attention of the guy that was telling me I was all wet all this time.
And if I were to guess, this would be a reasonably high-ranking chemist at UOP.
Right. Not, that wasn't his.
It wasn't his?
No, it was not that.
Okay.
He would not have been as dogmatic. But that was one of the things that kind of sticks in my memory is one of the things that I found to be challenging and interesting. Because I could not see how all these people over the years had been putting platinum on alumina and not realizing that there had to be something like ion exchange. You take chloroplatinic acid solution, it's yellow, and you throw alumina beads in that are white, and the alumina beads turn yellow and the solution turns pale. Then you throw a little acid in and the solution turns yellow and it's reversible. It's got to be ion exchange. And the fact that it never came to the attention of people working in the field prior to that time, it just has always amazed me. But it made the that period of my life interesting anyway.
Now, when you first started working with Hensel, he was not vice president, was he, or was he?
When I first started, he was director of the laboratory. He and Herman Bloch were directors. No, I think there was a man before Herman. I think there was a fellow named Dr. Chenisek, who was in charge of the organic half of the work at UOP, and Hensel was the inorganic. And Herman had a group that was working in designing catalysts for various isomerization. He and Lou Schmerling were working hard in the area of isomerization, and
I just saw an obituary not too long ago.
Lou Schmerling died. Yeah. Herman Bloch died 2 years ago.
Yes. How did Bloch fit into UOP then?
Bloch was a very, very mild-mannered, efficient, and highly intelligent researcher. Everybody had the greatest respect for Herman. Herman would listen to the little guys in his staff. He broad-minded and dedicated to encouraging younger people.
I didn't ask, was Trevor also including women in the disadvantaged or powers?
Triple powers?
Yeah.
There weren't that many women chemists, and I can't recall there being any at UOP the time I was there. They would be hired as lab assistants, but not chemists, professional. But because I just don't think there were that many. And but I'm sure if they had been taken advantage of, he would have been right there to help.
Even after Hensel became vice president, you still worked directly for him, or when followed, sir?
Yeah, Hensel went over to the administration building when other people were brought into the organization. We had a president of UOP by the name of John Logan, who I don't think was very partial to Vladimir. I think they had some current of disagreements. And Hensel was replaced and moved over to the administration building to become an assistant to the president instead of the job he had as director. I don't know the reasons, I can't think of the reasons behind that move. But then we had a succession of directors of research, and the latest was, well, the latest one that I had any contact with was Mary Good, and she's now still with the Allied Signal Company as vice president for development and research, I guess. I guess she comes back to Des Plaines periodically to oversee the operation.
How would you describe her?
One of the best people I ever knew. She was really wonderful to me. She did everything for me that was possible. A real capable and generous person.
Did she meet resistance because she was a woman, or?
I saw no evidence of that. Everybody rose to the occasion when she came. They recognized she was coming with quite a bit of background and company, confidence, and she just fit in perfectly. And
But that was a pretty big jump she made, if I remember.
from LSU, yeah. But
She was a college professor to director of.
she was an unusual person. She remains an unusual person. I guess she's now on the White House scientific staff. She was appointed to some position by President Bush about 3 years ago. But she's always been there, her hands in so many different things. I think it's because she can remember names so well. She can make a trip with 10 people she's met for the first time, and the next day she can call everybody by their first name. And not many people can remember names that well. But that's part of her personality. She's interested in people and knows that a person's name is very important. But she was a real gem for me. When she first came, there was a director for the department I was in who was asked to leave for previous reasons. And she asked me to be the stand-in director for a period of time until she could find somebody permanent. So I served as a stand-in director of research of this department for about, I guess it was 5 or 6 months. And after it was over, she took Mary and I to dinner at a very fancy French restaurant in Chicago, and really showed that she appreciated what I had tried to do for her. But she was just a real gem. I got a lot of encouragement from her that I hadn't gotten from some of my other immediate supervisors. And if I hadn't been so knocked down by my emphysema problem, I would have probably stayed on a little longer. But I knew I had this health problem I had to try to get under control. And so I had to bid farewell to the company, and but they've done very well by me pension-wise, and I appreciate it, and it's given me a chance to do some things that I wouldn't have done otherwise, like work on our family genealogy, and I'm working on another project that keeps me interested. There were 4 children in our family, and when my parents died, my mother died, I was living out here. My sister was living in Concord, New Hampshire, where my mother died. And so it just so happened, as you might expect, that the family photo albums, of which there were 4, ended up in my sister's closet. And none of my brothers or I ever inherited a photo album of us from the family, because Mary had them all, going back to our great-grandparents and so on. So I felt that I was shortchanging my kids, not having family photos to pass on to them. I've always been a photographer, amateur photographer. I have a darkroom in the basement I built for my youngest son when he was in high school. And he bought a nice, expensive color enlarger. Still sitting down there. So I bought a close-up lens for my Olympus camera. You can get down within about 6 inches of the table. and I bought a copy stand with the lights. And then I borrowed those 4 photo albums from my sister and meticulously went through them and copied every photo that was still in copyable condition to make a new black and white negative from all those old photos. And believe me, the copies are just as good as the originals by using that kind of technique, a close-up camera. Now I have, I think it was a total of something close to 300 new negatives from those old family photos that I am making copies of for my kids and grandchildren, brothers that didn't inherit the books. And I sent the photos back to Mary. So that's kept me busy copying photos and making the enlargements from the 35mm negatives. And then my wife's family had 13, she had 13 brothers and sisters in a similar situation. All the photo albums sitting down in the old farm in a closet, high humidity, getting musty and moldy. And 13 brothers and sisters with I don't know how many grandchildren without copies of those pictures. So I've borrowed those albums and have done the same thing and have made a new album for her side as well as mine that I can copy for all the kids. So it's been an interesting project, and it's one that's going to be appreciated in the future. But it's a good hobby. It's productive and enjoyable. But I bet there's a problem like that in practically every family. And if you get the work done professionally, it's expensive as hell. Marshall Fields does it. They have an ad in the paper every weekend. And they advertise that they'll make 2 copies of every photograph up to 5x7 size in the original size, 2 copies for $15, their regular price. So if you had a photo album of 300 pictures, it cost you a fortune to get it done professionally because a lot of it is time consuming. You have to focus in on it, and it isn't something you can put through a machine. So it's a project that I have learned how to master. And I can do it now without even having a darkroom. Because I can just take the picture and crop it so that when it's produced, it doesn't have anything extraneous on the sides. So I can have the copies made by a professional. And I don't have to worry about a lot of darkroom time. And so it's a hobby that I'm using now for people that have pictures that they want to have copies made of. I accommodate them very easily. And it makes an interesting hobby for retirement, where you have more time than money.
Did Basello ever encourage you to give up work and come back to graduate school full-time?
Yeah, right, he sure did. He assured me that it would be only about 3 years. But he couldn't convince Mary and I, because it looked like too big an investment of time out of our lives. We already had children. But he wanted me to do it.
Now, did you have classes to Herman Pines at that time, or?
No, my classes were Ralph Pearson. You remember him?
Yes.
And Fred Basello, and a couple of others that was down at the Chicago Avenue campus. But at the time, nobody had ever gotten a master's degree in chemistry at Northwestern from night school without taking residence on the campus. But Basello maneuvered, and I was able to get my master's degree and do the thesis work part-time basis, not full-time resident. And so that was something he did for me that I appreciated.
Now, brunauer did the same thing at George Washington for his master's. And
oh, he did it.
even for his PhD almost.
Oh.
He only spent about 9 months at Johns Hopkins in residence.
Oh. He was a very diligent person, and I'm sure that he had a drive that forced him to do it.
Yeah, that was one thing I wanted to ask him about how you viewed his drive and ambition.
Well, I guess to put it in the vernacular words, he never wanted anything he didn't earn. He had drive that kept him busy and kept him productive, but it was all in the direction of work, input. He wasn't looking for any easy way. The drive was to do it and do it properly through hard work. That's the way I would categorize it.
Did he ever talk to you about Hungary or?
No. There wasn't much mentioned except the Hungarian dessert that his mother was famous for. And there was never anything beyond that.
How many people at Portland Cement would have been at his level, technical level at that time, roughly?
Well, we had one chemist by the name of Harold Steinauer, who was mainly a theoretical chemist working on literature that was perhaps approaching brunauer's status, but certainly not equivalent. Brunauer's status was quite a bit above most of the people there.
That is scientific or administrative or both?
Administrative, I was thinking of, I guess.
Okay.
The background of Stephen's administrative experience was much broader than that of others at UOP, at BCA.
Now, someone told me, and I don't remember who it was some time ago, that when he first came there, he spent a lot of time and then with the literature and wrote a review paper on cement. Do you recall this or what it is?
Could it be the paper that he gave at the St. Louis?
I don't know.
Because it seems like kind of a review paper.
Yeah, that was on the BET more though. This would have been on Portland Cement, I think. If I remember, that one is on BET.
Yeah, this is primarily BET.
And he's disagreeing with Teller and
Right.
Millen.
Well, the last part of this article, he goes into description of some of the compounds. Topamorite, bicalcium, dicalcium silicate. He's describing the work with.
What would you say was his important scientific contributions at Portland Cement, or did you leave and don't?
I don't know whatever happened to the approach that he was taking, using calorimetric work to learn more about these gel components, or the measurement of surface energy of solids by this technique he developed. I thought maybe it was something he might have continued at Clarkson. But that would be the start of what might have been his greatest accomplishment.
Did he work with Harkness on this, or
With who?
Harkins, or Endura?
I don't think so. If he did, it wasn't something I had recognized.
Now, would he lay out a research program to you in considerable detail, or would it be adjusting day by day, or?
Adjusting day by day, I would say. He was following the work quite closely.
Did he ever comment on the McBain balance absorption versus the BET that he used?
No, except that in his book, this is his book.
That's the, yes.
And he had a very unique handwriting.
Yes.
He gave me an acknowledgement in the front piece in his handwriting, which I thought was unique.
Now, you had bought this before he come to work there?
I bought it while he was there and got him to give me his signature.
Would this have been close to when you were leaving, or?
Probably what,
Is October 5, 1953.
it was just about the time I was leaving. No, I didn't leave until the following year, I believe. I left in June, I think.
Oh, okay. Well, at least you had this in the lab.
No.
No?
My oldest son was about 2 years old at the time, and I had this book on my desk and a bottle of ink, and he opened the bottle of ink and loused up the cover of the book.
Oh.
And it's too late to get another signed
Yikes.
copy, so I
And
never...
it's out of print long ago.
Right.
The copy I have was given to me by Leonard Drake.
Oh. Wait, Drake.
Yeah, mercury porcelain.
Oh, he was one that developed that?
Yeah, Ritter and Drake.
Oh. The name sounded familiar when you first mentioned it, but I got to think, well, it was Drake.
Yeah, he worked at Mobile, and I worked at Mobile.
Oh, okay. We used the porosimeter at UOP to measure porosity of our catalyst supports.
Now, this machine that Dietz had, that he changed the mercury levels,
Yeah.
was this measuring how fast it took the two pressures to equilibrate, or you
No,
don't remember?
This was something I did back in 1954, 55. So it's 35, close to 40 years ago, and I just can't, I've been trying since you called to remember that device of Victor's because it was such a godsend for me at the time to measure surface areas with nitrogen without having to go through the high vacuum route. And Dietz was pretty proud of it at the time. And I had a copy of the reprint that he made describing it, but I couldn't find it when I went through my... This is the only Dietz reprint I could find. I don't think it's described there.
Did he ever mention his feelings on the BET when you were talking to him?
Victor Dietz?
Yes.
No. He didn't, we didn't go into the absorption theoretical part very much. It was mainly, he was showing me his bibliography he was working on and the apparatus that I was going to build based on his techniques. So I don't remember much discussion on that.
Now, did you ever miss not publishing work because you were working with companies?
No, because we had a very active patent attorney, and the company was always very interested in patents, so the publishing we did was via patents. So I accumulated my share of those, and felt that took the place of actual publishing work. I was involved in a couple papers, the paper we gave in Moscow. I was a co-author on, and there was another paper on aromatics production that I was co-author on that was published in an ACS journal. But publishing was very limited. But going back to the McBain balance again, one of the things that surprised me when I was getting at one point in my latter part of the career at UOP deeply involved in zeolites. We were trying to characterize zeolites in order to set standards so we would get more reproducible quality. But to try to characterize the zeolites quickly and simply, we were using the Drake porosimeter on some of the products that contain zeolites, and the nitrogen absorption. But I had a copy of Brecht's book, and that's considered the Bible in zeolite areas. But I was amazed. I don't think the word brunauer or BET is mentioned in the whole book of Brecht's on zeolites. They characterized their zeolites by the McBain balance method. They took a 1-point isotherm, which was just above the point B. So it would be showing essentially the maximum absorption.
Mm-hmm.
And it was determined as 0.16 P over P0, I think, for oxygen. And they used oxygen because I think there was one of the early zeolites that was characterized by Barr, one of them that would absorb oxygen but not nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And for that reason they used oxygen, I think, to measure the surface properties or the porosity of their zeolites at Lindy. And they did it with a McBain balance type and just 1-point isotherm. They never used BET procedures. They didn't have to with zeolites that are always flat, but type 1 isotherms. I was amazed that they wouldn't use a BET approach, because if the zeolite is not completely crystallized, there would be some multilayer absorption, and they wouldn't necessarily pick it up with a 1-point isotherm. So I was kind of surprised that the people at Lindy Carbide, Union Carbide, would not use at least a 3 or 4-point isotherm. But apparently they felt they were able to characterize their zeolite adequately with the 1 point.
Now, did Brunauer ever go back to, you said Copeland was doing the nitrogen absorption isotherms. Brunauer was able to keep his hands off of that without...
Yeah, I don't think Brunauer ever went into Copeland's laboratory to use any of the equipment. And by the time I had left there, the BET apparatus had been turned over to another chemist to run samples on. Copeland at that time was busily designing a twin calorimeter. He was building a real fancy calorimeter. And he referred to it as a twin calorimeter. I don't recall the significance of the word twin, except that maybe he was getting a differential calorimetric reaction with running a known in one at the same time he's running an unknown to get the difference. That may have been the principle. But that was what Copeland was working on primarily at the time I left, and probably for the rest of his career there. I don't know whether Copeland is still alive or not.
I don't think so, but I don't know.
I don't think so either. He did not appear to be all that healthy.
Now, they had several papers together. Did they work closely together, or?
Steve and Lou?
Yes.
Yes, right. They were buddies.
Mm-hmm. Did they interact daily or infrequently, or?
Daily, I would say. They would certainly have lunch together every day in the lunchroom.
Did you join them for lunch, or did?
Usually, yeah.
You did? And was lunch discussion more about work, or, for example, Emmett said when he was at the Manhattan Project that he would go to lunch with the guy that started or went to hydrocarbon research and who developed Fischer tropes,
Oh,
and that they would go to lunch and discuss Fischer tropes. So would Brunauer and Copeland discuss work, or?
I would say 9 times out of 10 it would be work. I can't recall any trivial conversations.
How would you describe Copeland as a person?
Straight arrow, honest, hard thinker. Generous to work with. In other words, he'd be very helpful if you needed help in understanding something. He was Welsh, I believe, his background.
Was he outgoing, or was he more like Brunauer?
More like brunauer, I think. But he had a lot of good advice. At the time when I was working with him, wasn't married, was courting my wife, but he would give me lots of good advice. He and Trevel both.
Well, you worked with him a lot longer than with Brunauer.
Yes.
Yeah. He set up the absorption apparatus after you started there, or?
He was in the process of building it when I went. No, he wasn't, because the laboratory that I was fitting with electricity and water was a storeroom before that. And it was storeroom was cleaned out and converted into a laboratory. after I knocked down the cinder block wall. And the nitrogen absorption apparatus was on a table that was made for it in that facility. So it was done definitely after I was there and had installed the plumbing and so on.
Did you do the glass blowing or did someone else?
Copeland did the glass blowing.
So he was
He was the glass blower. I picked up a little bit of glass blowing. I took a course in Wheaton. I was taught by Frank Hayes, who I later joined at UOP. He was the official glass blower at UOP, but he taught this night school course out at Wheaton, and we all had to make a condenser as the examination. Most of us made condensers that cracked the next morning after the professor had graded them. Incidentally, do you happen to remember who it was that developed carbon dating?
Libby.
Libby?
Or
Where?
Calvin. Libby.
Libby at what, Columbia?
He was at Columbia, so I'm not sure what his timing was on.
Oh,
It was around 1950,
yeah.
a little after that.
And what is Libby's background?
He was a chemist,
Oh,
and
because there was a chemist that I went to school with. He went to Columbia, Larry Culp. And he, at one point, I thought was being given credit for the carbon dating development. And I haven't been able to document that. The reason it came up recently was because with all this talk about acid rain, Senator Moynihan convinced the government to spend $500 million over a 10-year period to study thoroughly the acid rain problem to find out what it amounted to. And Larry Culp was the one from Columbia who was chosen to head up that study.
how did he spell his name?
K-U-L-P. He was asked by President Reagan, I guess, or Carter, to head up that study on acid rain. The study was completed 2 years ago, and the $500 million had been spent. And according to editorials in the Wall Street Journal, the study showed virtually no evidence of acid rain problems. But you've heard nothing about it, except more money being spent on it. I was interested because I knew Larry Culp, and I knew that he was the one that was the original director of that project. And knowing him, I would have full confidence in whatever conclusion he would come to. And as far as his competence is concerned, as I say, I've associated him with the carbon dating, although I haven't been able to find any literature to back me up on that point, and I was thinking maybe you might know.
No, in fact, I think that's what Libby got the Nobel Prize for. So.
Oh. Well, maybe Culp worked for him. Maybe that's a connection.
It could well be.
Yeah.
Do you have any other comments on the Portland Cement Association that I haven't?
It's a pretty durable organization. They've been expanding. They don't drive very much anymore, but the last time I was over in that area, I saw that they had added on quite a bit to their research building, so they're still in business and still researching cement, I guess, trying to find out how the Romans did it.
Do you have any names of people that I should be aware of that would have been there during that period that might have interacted with Brunauer? And
A. Allen Bates was the director of research at that time. But I suspect that he is probably no longer alive. He was, I would guess, in his 50s in that period. Harold Steinhauer that I mentioned was another one, but I'm sure that
S-T-E-I-N?
S-T-E-I-N-O-U-R, Steinhauer. But I suspect he's gone also. I tell you what, Burton, why don't I let you take this book? This contains the author for a number of papers that were written about that time. And it'll give you a listing of possible people to contact.
Okay. Well, I will send it back to
Yeah,
UPS so that
That's
they...
been sitting on the shelf in the basement in my storage area in the basement for all these years, and I haven't referred to it until just now.
Well,
And it's a little bit musty
that's all right.
because of that. But
No, I will send it back to you.
there are plenty of authors cited,
Mhm.
some of them from Portland Cement Association here, and some of them from the National Bureau of Standards and other places. But they were all in the 1952 to 53 time period, I think.
So that will give me an
That would-
idea of
yeah.
what was going on there.
Right, so you're welcome to that. Did you see that? You've seen this?
Yes, I have a copy of, I
Okay.
bought a used copy out of the
Oh,
bookstore.
and
In fact, I have probably 15 books on McCarthy now. I've been,
oh,
uh,
he generated a lot of steam, didn't he?
yes, he did. How was research carried out at that time there? Was it very formally structured, or was it very informal? Or?
We had reports that had to be written monthly to our department head. All research work was directed toward publications such as those in that book. And the budgeting was to handle way above my level. All I knew is that the pay scales were poorer than the teachers at the time, and getting paid once a month meant a real problem for home budgets.
Now, would you expect Brunauer's reports would still be on file there, or would he be the one that would write the monthly report?
I would expect that there would be a file of his correspondence while he was there. That may be on the premises, but may also have been stored in salt mine in Kansas City. I
Oh. But he did write the monthly report? Or
Right.
did you write it and then he review it, or?
I think I turned in our monthly report to him, and then he added his to whatever I wrote.
Mhm.
That's my best recollection, but I may be wrong.
I know, it's been a while.
It's been quite a while.
These were done in handwriting and then typed up, or?
I believe so, yes. We had a secretary that used to type them, I'm sure. There was a little competition between various departments at the time, and I'm sure that required careful documentation.
What were the other departments?
Well, there was one department that was headed by a fellow that I remember his name quite well, George Verbeck. He was perhaps 10 years older than I was at the time, but he headed up a department where they were involved in more massive type of testing. Freeze-thawing cycles. They had a big freezer room and they cast these specimens of concrete cylinders or blocks and put them through so many cycles of freezing and thawing and then measure the deterioration in strength. And that type of research or development, it was far removed from the basic research of the type that we were trying to do, such as brunauer's measurement of the heats of solution of specific compounds. So George Verbeck's group never showed particular signs of appreciation for the money we were spending down in our end of the building. It was always kind of a sore point. We were spending too much on stuff that didn't amount to a hill of beans. Where they were the bread and butter, they had freezing and thawing data to turn over to the customers. The Treble could hold his own. Can't think of anything else that would be illustrative of Portland cement.
Now, were you out in Skokie when he came, or were you still
I was
there?
out in Skokie when he came. We moved out there about 1948, I think.
Now, Steve came out by himself. His family stayed back in Washington for almost a year or so.
That could be, I'm not sure.
Or for some period. I don't
Okay,
know the exact time.
I'm not sure of that.
She didn't come out here until she had lost her position officially.
Oh, I see. It was after that, I guess, then that we went to their house for dinner. 'Cause she seemed to have been well ensconced in the house at the time we were there for dinner. Did all the cooking and so on. Now, I have to say, going back to a question you had earlier, there was no evidence that I can recall that either Steve or Esther, to the extent that we had contact with her, felt deeply depressed. They just seemed to be very serious people. Serious about doing their job and doing what needed to be done.
Did the children eat dinner with you all, or were they?
Yes. They were quite young at the time. I don't recall their ages, but
Were they long enough in religion then they had prayer at dinner, or do you remember?
I don't think there was prayer at dinner.
Mhm. Now, he became a deacon in the,
First Baptist Church?
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't know that.
or at least he was in Clarkson, so,
Oh,
or at, in,
Evanston
no, in New York,
and Clarkson College?
yeah,
And that was the First Baptist Church out there.
yeah.
So it was, I'm sure it was First Baptist in Evanston. Well, apparently he joined it right away as soon as he came to live in Evanston. Shortly thereafter, I was told that he had joined the Baptist Church.
Let's see, you were Baptist, or,
Yeah, my father was a Baptist minister.
and he never discussed it with you, though?
No,
Did he know you were,
I'm
Son
sure,
of-
that sooner or later it came up in one of our discussions. But it never seemed to be a particular point of departure for any big discussion. It's just matter of fact.
now some people say that, and I have about 30 hours of tapes of Brunauer recalling some of his early years.
Oh,
He was very conscious of rankings, like who was number one. He would talk about presidents being ranked as scientists, and he would say that he was not of the order of Einstein. He would be a level below that. Was that typical of him at the time you knew him, or that?
the only thing I could think of that might have a bearing on that thought is the reference that he and Copeland in particular continued to make about gamma, as if gamma were on the Einstein level, above them. I mean, he was sort of their source of reliability.
Now in Washington, he was a big football fan. You don't know about his sports here?
No. The only other trivial thing that ever stuck in my memory about a conversation with him was he was trying to find the best route from his house in Evanston to the Portland Cement Laboratory. And I directed him to an east-west street, and I can't remember which one it was now, that I thought would be shorter for him. And he tried it once and reported back to me that my idea wasn't too good. He said, there are fewer stoplights on your route, but there is a stop sign about every third block. So you have to stop just as often. You don't have to wait for a light to change, but he preferred to take the other street where there were fewer stop signs and more stop lights and try to time it. So that's the only trivial conversation I can recall as sticking with my I can't seem to recall any other. It goes back quite a while.
No,
And but I can say definitely very little, if any, time was ever spent with him decrying his predicament. in front of me,
Uh-huh.
as if it was unfair or that he had been mistreated. He just seemed to have accepted it as his fate. He was a very, very kind person. I felt sorry for what happened to him and his family, and felt even sorrier when Esther died, because I knew that they were, from all I could gather, were pretty close. But apparently his second marriage didn't pan out.
Well, he had a first one, which was to a woman in New York City before Esther.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
But he never said much about it.
Yeah.
She was, in fact, her brother was an editor of a paper that was supported by the communists.
Oh,
And so that one only lasted for a brief time, 2 or 3 years. Then Esther was the second one, and Dama was the third one.
okay. Well, the one that I thought was his second was actually
His third, yes.
I met her at St. Louis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was there.
I thought it was a coincidence that he was on his second wife. At the same time, shortly thereafter, I think it was, that I met Emmett in London, and he was there on his honeymoon.
Why didn't you have the impression the third one didn't work out well?
I didn't know that it didn't work out.
Oh,
I wasn't aware that.
no, I misunderstood them.
No, I was aware that he remarried, but I wasn't aware that that marriage didn't last long.
Well, no, they remained married till his death.
They did?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that you were referring to her as the one that made out pretty.
No, that was Emmett's second wife that did.
Emmett's second wife, oh,
Yes.
okay.
And then he married Pauling's sister.
Oh, okay.
And
No, I was confused between
Oh,
Emmett
okay.
and Brunauer. Because I met Brunauer's second wife when he was in St. Louis.
What was your impression of her?
She seemed to be a very friendly person, and the right kind of temperament for him, I thought, from the little bit of contact we had at that meeting.
Now, what does that mean?
Well, they were both serious-minded people. She wasn't, from my impression, she was fairly close to his age, but I'd be wrong on that. But they seemed to be talking the same language when it came to discussing work. So I thought she was probably scientifically trained, and I thought they were. But as I did, it's just on the spot
Yes.
impressions that 30 years since.
May or may not be. Now, did you meet Hugh Taylor at the meeting?
No, I didn't. He was there. I heard him give the presentation, but I have never met officially Hugh Taylor. He was always surrounded by the people like Emmett and Brunauer and Zellemeyer and the people that were very, very active in those circles. And I was, at that time, very much a neophyte in the area.
How come you went to this ACS meeting? Did Brunauer invite you, or you just
No,
wanted?
Vladimir Hensel saw the program, and he asked me if I wanted to go to that meeting. Because I was working for PCA at the time. So Vladimir saw the meeting and saw what it was going to be. And he was the one that prompted me to go.
You mean Hensel, even at that time, would have remembered you were at PCA at that time? And
Hensel knew that I worked for Brunauer.
uh-huh.
And see, that meeting was in 1962. I had been at UOP about 5 years at that point. And no, yeah, 62, was that 62 that meeting was?
No, I was just amazed that Hensel would have that personal knowledge of people, but I guess.
That's the way he was. It was 1960 or 61, so I had been at UOP about 3 years at the time. But Hensel knew of my background with Brunauer. And as soon as he saw the program, he came right down to my office and asked me if I wouldn't like to go. So I took him up on it right away. But I'd only been at UOP for about 3 years, and I hadn't been that steeped in Catalysis lore at that point. But I jumped at the chance to go and see Steve again. Oh, incidentally, I think I think Trevel and Hensel knew each other before I went to UOP, because every time I'd mentioned Trevel Powers, Hensel would respond as if he knew who I was talking about, as if they had had some contact before. So Hensel knew my background from working with Trevel and Brunauer. And Vasolo. Vasolo was pretty knowledgeable about UOP affairs.
How did UOP change over the time you were there?
Well, it became a much larger company. When I went there, it was just UOP. Then we had a president, John Logan, who decided the company was bigger than just UOP. And he started buying up a lot of companies and enlarged UOP quite a bit. But in more recent years, they've had to retract and sell off a lot of those adventures of John Logan. So it's changed and went through a growth period that was not sustainable. I gotta take another walk. went to UOP first, they were just beginning to reap the rewards of their investment in platforming catalyst, which was the discovery of Val Hensel and his associates, I think Herman Block and Larry Gerhold and a few others had a... Incidentally, did you know about Larry Gerhold?
No.
He was one of the prime movers in the days when the platforming catalyst was being first considered and developed.
How does he spell his last name?
Gerhold.
G?
Gerhold.
Uh-huh.
D, not T.
Yeah, I have D.
Okay. And he was a consultant to the president for many years. And he used to consult with me, and he was very interested in this fiber project that I was working on, and he used to come over about once every week or so to talk with me about it. And he was hoping that we'd advance it and get it in time for the application of fiber optics. He thought there was a good opportunity for that potential, so he was very interested in it. He's getting an award this fall, I think, down at the IICHE meeting in Miami. I think it's an ICHE meeting. I believe it's this month or next month.
That's this coming week, I think.
Okay, he's presumably going to be given an award at that meeting. He must be pretty close to 85 years old. A real gentleman, if there ever was one.
What did he do with platforming?
He was one of the close associates with Hensel and Apatieff. I think he was in charge of the laboratory in Riverside. Or he was an assistant to Apatieff, who may have been in charge. I've forgotten the details of that part of UOP history. But Apatieff was the prime mover in catalysis, and he was the one that Val Hensel worked for.
Yes.
And Larry Gerhold, I think, had a position in the administration of research at that point. But he was very active-minded and contributory in ideas, and one of the major contributors to the platforming catalyst development. And he's getting an award because of that at the ICHE meeting.
Now, I've heard many stories about platforming, and two of them I'll say to you just to get your reaction to.
Okay.
One of them was that Apatieff more or less gave this to Hensel, since he was very supportive of Hensel.
Right.
How would you react to that?
Well, I tell you, Burton, whenever a successful idea comes along that turns into a multi-million-dollar development,
It's easy to find fathers.
there are all kinds of fathers of the idea, and criticism of competitors for that distinction. I really don't know the whole story and the truth behind it. I've heard stories such as similar to what you referred to, but I knew Val Hensel, and I knew what kind of a mind he had, and I'm willing to accept as fact the fact that he had as much to do with the idea as Apatieff had.
Uh-huh.
Apatieff was his boss, and Val shows Apatieff all kinds of respect for it. Whether or not Apatieff gave him the idea, or a lot of ideas come by synergistic interactions. And well, anyway, I think Val is due all the credit.
Yeah, well, he has the patents as an individual.
Right. And that should be the proof in the pudding.
Yes, it would seem to me they wouldn't take a chance on a patent.
Right. But there are some people who contribute an awful lot to it that didn't get their what I think is their fair due. And,
Uh-huh.
one of them is an engineer, chemical engineer, by the name of Rod Donaldson,
ROD?
R-O-D,
Oh.
Rod
Uh-huh.
Donaldson.
I've seen Donaldson's
Yeah,
name on
his
some.
name was on some of the early papers. He was in charge of our research pilot plant operation for many, many years. And he retired a month before I did. But he had survived a episode with very, very severe cancer, bladder cancer, that had spread to his intestine. But he had some good doctors and a real strong desire to fight it. And he's still alive, and I see him once or twice every 6 months. We get together. I go up to his house, or he comes down here.
Uh-huh.
But the latest is he now had renal failure,
Uh-huh.
and he's now on dialysis. But he has put in a 15-year survival of the original cancer, as severe as it was. But he was one of the early workers designing tests to help develop the platforming catalyst. And I don't think he was, over the years, given really as much credit as he deserves for that.
Uh-huh.
But there were a lot of inputs there. There was Val, and there was Herman Block, Larry Gerhold, Rod Donaldson, and Chuck Berger. Now, Chuck Berger is one that could give you a lot of insight. He's still alive, and I see every once in a while a letter he writes to the editor of the Tribune.
Oh, he's in the Chicago area?
He's in the Chicago area, in LaGrange, I believe. But I see a letter from Chuck Berger every once in a while on a topic of energy or something to do with fuels and so on. And I'm sure it's the Chuck Berger that I used to know at UOP. But he was there in the early days of platforming also. When I got in, platforming was already an established
Uh-huh.
process that was turning over millions of dollars for UOP, and very successful. And when I got involved, it was the beginning of the bimetallic area. And soon we were into rhenium platinum catalysts and germanium platinum. I don't know whether it's kosher to use the word germanium now in public. At the time we called it R20 catalyst,
Mm-hmm.
but the composition was never
Divulged?
officially.
Well, there are at least patents that have
There are
germanium.
patents, right. But that was our R20 catalyst. Incidentally, the Gore family, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, talking about germanium, the Gore family is sitting on one of the very, very rare rich deposits of germanium metal down in Tennessee.
No, I didn't realize it.
Their farm is located right at the spot where one of the richest lodes of germanium metal exists. So they're sitting on a big pile of germanium, which could have a future someday in the area of semiconductors maybe, or... Well, anyway, I was involved in the bimetallic catalyst work, and that was very interesting.
How did UOP get scooped on the bimetallics?
We got scooped by Chevron. Chevron scooped us on rhenium, and we had to take second fiddle to Chevron on rhenium. We were working on metals such as germanium and tin, and they proved to be just about as good as rhenium in some respects. Gave us higher yield products, but we came in late with platinum rhenium.
There's always rumors about, did UOP get on to the rumors of platinum rhenium at Chevron before it was publicly announced?
I think that did happen. I don't know the circumstances completely. There was some talk about some salesman carrying a story from one place to
No,
another.
that's it.
Now that's just
No, I understand.
hearsay, it's not established fact, but that happens frequently in situations like this. But salesmen can be too careless with their customers sometimes, and that was one theory that was exploited.
Mhm.
But we were scooped. We came in late, but we made money on it too.
Mhm.
I don't know what other excuse there could be other than the fact that they were pursuing it more vigorously than we did, and they went out. But we've made money on the other catalysts too.
But you were working on the germanium before the platinum.
We were working on, we had a high sulfur system that gave us higher yield. An HY process that gave us higher yield and more stability. That had been announced, I think, prior to the rhenium emergence. I think currently the platforming scene has not changed much in the last 5 or 10 years. It's still the bimetallics are the workhorse of the industry. But our CCR unit, the continuous regeneration, is what has made money for UOP primarily.
Now, do you go back to UOP since you've retired, or do you just consult with other companies?
I had this short-lived consulting contract with a company that was what I referred to earlier when I was talking with this professor from Lehigh. That turned out to be a very brief consulting contract, and I think what they wanted was somebody to come in and work in their laboratory on catalyst development. Well, I had been retired about 3 or 4 years at that time and wasn't about to, with my health problems, go back to a full-time lab job just to help somebody. So I insisted on just giving him verbal assistance, but they were going to pay me by the hour. And I thought, well, that's it. I'll just give them a little bill for the hours I'd take writing my verbal, my oral reports. And it didn't amount to anything worth pursuing. And then they were going to, since they couldn't get any lab workers here in their lab, they were going to have the lab work done at Lehigh with this professor of geology. And I was to consult with him then over the phone. Well, if you're getting paid by the hour and you're consulting over the phone, the chances of getting rich are rather diminished. So I just called a halt to it. I said I couldn't continue that kind of operation. It was spending a lot of time but not being able to bill it because I wasn't punching a clock. And so this consulting was in quotes. They wanted somebody to punch a clock and work in the lab and try to induce a retiree with a fancy set of words, and it didn't work. So I haven't done any consulting. I had more important things to do with my time.
Well, I don't want to take your whole day up. And,
We're kind of in a cluttered situation here that my youngest son has just bought a new house up in Lake Zurich, and they had to sell and get out of their current house, so they've been doubling up in an apartment and storing all their camper out there and lawn furniture in the backyard and extra stuff in our basement for a month or so while waiting for their house to get finished. So, and they're also depending on us to help entertain the grandchildren because it's hard for the kids to put up with a one-room apartment. So I expect they'll be coming over this afternoon. They were here almost all day yesterday. So this was an interesting way to break up the day. I enjoyed talking with you on it, and I hope I've given you some more information.
It was very good. I certainly appreciate the opportunity.
Now, it was nice to find out where I'd seen the name Burt Davis.
Membership in the Tri-State Catalyst Club is the only means of being a member of the Catalysis Society, the National Society. And so, for those of you who wish to be a member of the Catalysis Society,